A picture is supposed to capture a moment in time, but what if it captures the last? A legendary pilot vanishing over the vast Pacific, an entire family of children, seemingly swallowed by fire and smoke, leaving not a single trace behind. A young woman who disappears from a snowy roadside in the blink of an eye. Some people just step out of their lives and are never seen again. They leave behind a legacy of questions, a vacuum of what is that echo for decades. Their stories become our stories, whispered in late-night conversations and debated on internet forums, all fueled by this deep human need to solve the unsolvable. These are the cases that haunt us, the ones that defy easy explanation. They tap into our deepest fears, the unknown, the loss of control, and the chilling idea that a person can simply cease to be. Today, we're looking at the strange clues and unsettling theories left behind in three of history's most perplexing unsolved disappearances, journeying from the golden age of aviation to the dawn of the internet to explore the dark and mysterious voids these people left behind. Our first story starts with a name you definitely know, a legend etched into the 20th century, Amelia Earhart. By 1937, Earhart wasn't just a pilot. She was a global icon, a symbol of courage and modern womanhood. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, but she wanted one more record to cement her legacy forever, to be the first woman to fly around the world. Purdue University, where Earhart was a career counselor, helped her get her flying laboratory, the state-of-the-art Lockheed Electra 10E, with her trusted navigator, Fred Noonan. She set off on the grueling 29,000-mile journey. They knocked out over 22,000 miles, a huge accomplishment. But on July 2nd, 1937, as they took off from New Guinea for one of their final, most dangerous legs, they were flying toward a destiny no one saw coming. Their target was Howland Island, a tiny, flat speck of land in the middle of the immense Pacific Ocean. It was barely 2 miles long and half a mile wide. Finding it after flying over 2,500 miles of open water was an incredible navigational challenge, relying almost completely on Fred Noonan's ability to navigate by the stars. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was waiting at the island to give them radio guidance. As the Electra got closer, Earhart's voice crackled over the radio, filled with static. Her words conveyed a growing uncertainty. She reported they were low on fuel. She thought they were close, but she just couldn't see the island. One of her last confirmed messages was, "We are on the line of position 157 to 337. We are running north and south." Then silence. The largest and most expensive sea and air search in American history was launched. For 16 days, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard scoured 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no sign of the plane or its crew. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan had vanished. The official conclusion was the most straightforward one, the crash and sink theory. It suggests the Electra ran out of fuel and was forced to ditch at sea, where it broke apart and sank to the bottom of the deep ocean, lost forever. This is still the most widely accepted explanation. But for a mystery this big, a simple explanation is never quite enough. And that's where the story takes a turn. The most compelling alternative is the Nikumaroro hypothesis. This theory centers on a different island, once called Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro. It's a remote, uninhabited coral atoll about 400 miles southeast of Howland Island. Supporters of this theory, especially the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIRE, believe that Earhart and Noonan, unable to find Howland, diverted to Nikumaroro as a last resort. They argue the island's flat reef could have worked for an emergency landing at low tide. The evidence is tantalizing. In the days after the disappearance, radio operators across the Pacific reported hearing faint distress calls. While many were dismissed as hoaxes, some were deemed credible, suggesting Earhart might have been transmitting from a grounded plane for days, something that would be impossible if she'd sunk in the ocean. Expeditions to Nikumaroro have found artifacts that fuel this theory. Remnants of an American-made shoe, a jar of what looked like freckle cream which Earhart used, and most chillingly, a partial human skeleton found back in the 1940s. At the time, the bones were crudely measured and assumed to be male, then lost. But in 2018, Forensic anthropologists reevaluated those original measurements and concluded the remains were more likely from a female of European ancestry, with a height consistent with Amelia Earhart. Even more recently, analysis of historical photographs, some dating as far back as 1938, and modern satellite imagery has revealed a visual anomaly on the island. Researchers believe this object, partially buried in sand and coral, could have a size and shape consistent with parts of Earhart's Lockheed Electra. This has spurred a new wave of interest. An expedition, a joint effort involving Purdue University, was planned to sail to Nikumaroro to investigate the object up close with advanced sonar and other tools. The stated goal was to bring Amelia's story and hopefully her plane back home. However, in late 2025, that expedition was postponed. The delay was blamed on needing final permit clearances from the government of Kiribati, which controls the island, and the start of the South Pacific cyclone season, making a trip unsafe. The team is now targeting early 2026, after the storm season passes, to finally get a close-up look at what's hiding in the coral. While the Nikumaroro hypothesis is a leading alternative, a third, more conspiratorial theory has persisted: the Japanese capture theory. This theory suggests Earhart and Noonan strayed into Japanese-controlled territory, were captured and either executed or died in captivity on the island of Saipan. It's mostly based on anecdotal stories and alleged eyewitness accounts, but no concrete evidence has ever surfaced. So here we are, nearly 90 years later. Did Earhart and Noonan meet a quick end in the cold Pacific? Or did they fight for survival on a deserted island? Their calls for help fading into nothing? The answer might just be waiting under the sands of Nikumaroro. Our next story takes us to a small town in West Virginia. On Christmas Eve of 1945, a night that was supposed to be magical. But for the Sodder family, it became the start of a lifelong nightmare. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants and the proud parents of 10 children living in Fayetteville. That Christmas Eve, 9 of their kids were home. The 5 older ones, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, were allowed to stay up late to play with new toys. Around midnight, their mother, Jenny, told them to wrap it up and head to bed before she and George went to sleep with their youngest, 2-year-old Sylvia. Then, around 1 a.m., the phone rang, shattering the quiet. Jenny answered. A woman she didn't know asked for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny said it was a wrong number and hung up, noticing the lights were still on and the older kids were still awake. She figured they'd go to bed soon. That was the first strange link in a chain of bizarre events. 30 minutes later, Jenny was jolted awake again by a loud thud on the roof, then a rolling sound. She fell back asleep, only to wake up a third time around 1:30 a.m. to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. Panic. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children sleeping on the ground floor managed to escape the inferno. But upstairs, in the attic bedrooms, 5 children remained trapped. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. The staircase was a wall of fire. Frantic, George raced outside for the ladder he always kept propped against the house. He'd climbed to the windows, but the ladder wasn't there. It was gone. Next, he thought of his work trucks. He'd drive one up to the house and climb on top. He ran to them, the same trucks that worked perfectly the day before. Neither would start. It was as if every possible escape route had been cut off. The phone line was dead. A neighbor had to race to a nearby tavern to call for help. But the Fayetteville Fire Department was small and mostly volunteer. By the time a fire engine finally arrived hours later, at 8 a.m., it was too late. The Sodder home was a smoking pile of ash. All the survivors could do was watch, helpless, as they assumed their 5 children were consumed by the flames. The official investigation concluded the fire was accidental, caused by faulty wiring, and the 5 missing children had been cremated in the blaze. Death certificates were issued, but George and Jenny couldn't accept it. Their grief was being replaced by a terrifying suspicion. For one, Jenny, a homemaker, knew a house fire, even a hot one, wouldn't be hot enough to completely vaporize bone. She started burning animal bones in the yard, and no matter how hot the fire, charred bones always remained. An employee at a crematorium confirmed it. bones don't just vanish. And the other strange events started to look less like coincidences. A repairman confirmed their phone line hadn't burned. It had been cut. The missing ladder was found days later, tossed in an embankment 75 feet away. And then there were the strange warnings. Months before, a man had warned George's fuse boxes would cause a fire someday. Just before Christmas, an insurance salesman got angry when George refused a policy and warned him his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed because of George's vocal anti-Mussolini opinions. The Sodders became convinced the fire was arson, a cover for an abduction. They hired a private investigator who uncovered a disturbing story. The fire chief had allegedly found what he thought was a heart in the ashes, hidden in a box, and buried it. The chief later supposedly confessed it was just beef liver he planted, hoping finding remains would get the family to stop asking questions. In 1949, the Sodders funded their own excavation and found a few small bone fragments identified as human vertebrae. But a report from the Smithsonian delivered another shock. The bones belonged to a single person, age 16 or 17, too old to be their oldest missing child, 14-year-old Maurice. And the bones showed no signs of being in a fire. Sightings trickled in over the years. A woman claimed to see the kids in a car speeding away as the house burned. A waitress 50 miles away claimed she served them breakfast the next morning with 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction. Then, in 1968, 20 years after the fire, the most haunting clue arrived. An envelope, postmarked from Kentucky, was mailed to Jenny. Inside was a photo of a young man in his 20s who looked strikingly like their son Louis would have. On the back, a cryptic note, Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Ill boys, a 90132 or 35. They hired another PI to go to Kentucky, but that detective was never heard from again. In 1952, George and Jenny put up a billboard on Route 16 with the children's faces, offering a reward. It became a heartbreaking local landmark. George and Jenny went to their graves, believing their children were still out there somewhere. To this day, the fate of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty remains a complete mystery. These first 2 cases show how fast a life, or 5 lives, can become a permanent question mark. Before we get to our final mystery, if these stories fascinate you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue to explore these important cases. Now, let's look at a disappearance from our own time, one that continues to baffle a generation of online sleuths. Our final case takes us to a chilly New England winter in 2004. This is a story of Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student whose disappearance became one of the first great mysteries of the internet age. It's a case defined not by a lack of clues, but by an abundance of strange and contradictory ones that just don't add up. On the surface, Maura Murray was a bright, successful young woman, a Dean's List student at UMass Amherst and a talented athlete. But in the days before she vanished, her life seemed to be quietly unraveling. She'd gotten into minor trouble for credit card fraud just days before she disappeared. She crashed her father's new car, and hours before she was last seen, her supervisor at her campus security job found her in a catatonic state, just staring into space. On Monday, February 9th, 2004, Maura made a series of odd choices. She emailed her professors that there had been a death in the family, and she'd be gone for a week. This was a lie. She packed a bag with toiletries, makeup textbooks, and birth control pills. She withdrew $280 from an ATM, almost all the money in her account. Then she got into her black 1996 Saturn and started driving north, telling no one where she was going. Her destination seemed to be somewhere in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a place she knew from family trips. Around 7:27 p.m., on a dark, snowy stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, a local resident heard a loud bang. Outside, she saw Maura's Saturn stuck in a snowbank. A school bus driver named Butch Atwood was heading home and stopped moments later. He asked the young woman at the wheel, Maura, if she needed help or if he should call the police. Maura's response was strange. She was cold and shivering, but said she was okay. She begged him not to call the police, claiming she'd already called AAA for roadside assistance. This was another lie. There was no self-service in the area and no record of a call. Feeling uneasy, Butch drove the short distance home and called 911 himself at 7:43 p.m. A police officer arrived on the scene at 7:46 p.m. At most, 10 to 15 minutes had passed since Butch left her. The car was there, locked. The airbags were deployed, but Maura Murray was gone. The scene was an enigma. Inside the car were her wallet, credit cards, cash, and backpack. A box of wine was on the floor, some of it spilled, but there was no sign of Maura. No footprints in the snow led away from the road. A police dog was brought in and tracked the scent for about 100 yards east down the road, where the trail abruptly stopped, as if she got into a vehicle. In that tiny window of time, maybe 10 minutes, Maura Murray had vanished into thin air. The initial investigation was slow. Police thought she might be a runaway trying to avoid a DUI charge. But as days turned into weeks with no contact, the grim reality set in. Over the past 2 decades, 3 main theories have emerged. First, she ran away to start a new life. People who believe this point to her odd preparations and suggest a tandem driver met her at the crash site. But why leave her money and all her belongings behind? And how has she stayed hidden for over 20 years without a single trace? Second, she succumbed to the elements. Maybe she was disoriented, wandered into the vast wilderness of the White Mountains, and died of exposure. But massive searches with helicopters and thermal imaging have turned up nothing. And it doesn't explain why the tracking dog lost her scent in the middle of the road. This leads to the third and most sinister theory: foul play. This theory suggests Maura was not alone. Did she accept a ride from a predator who saw a vulnerable young woman on a dark road? Was the crash even an accident? The scent trail ending abruptly is the strongest evidence for this. Her father, Fred Murray, has always believed his daughter was abducted by a local. The case remains a suspicious missing persons case in New Hampshire's cold case unit. Renewed media focus, especially from her family, has raised questions about the initial police work, but no official new evidence has been confirmed. Maura Murray's disappearance is a modern ghost story, a chilling reminder that a person can be there 1 minute and gone the next, leaving only a car on a lonely road and 1,000 unanswered questions. From the endless Pacific, to a smoldering ruin on Christmas Eve, to a snowy road in New Hampshire, these 3 stories are more than just unsolved cases. They are cautionary tales about the fragility of life and the haunting power of the unknown. Amelia Earhart, the Sodder children, and Maura Murray are frozen in time, their final moments replayed and re-examined by a world that refuses to forget. The search for answers continues, driven by families who won't give up hope and a public that has become an army of armchair detectives. The truth, if it ever comes, might be in the deep sea, in a DNA match, or in the conscience of someone holding a decades-old secret. But I want to know what you think. What do you believe happened to Amelia Earhart? Do you think the Sodder children survived the fire? Who or what did Maura Murray meet on that dark road? Leave your theories in the comments below. And if you found this dive into history's most infamous disappearances compelling, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.